and I'm with the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. And thank you so much for being here today for an important conversation around climate change in Iowa. For folks who are new, Intersections is a monthly civility luncheon. We hold it every first Friday of every month, and we hold a similar one in Des Moines on the third Friday of every month. So usually our practice is that our presenter will speak for about 30 minutes, and then there will be time for question and answer for about 30 minutes, and I will bring the microphone around. So today we have Professor Schnoor with us. He is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering for his pioneering work. Like, this is going to be a tough bio to say. Using mathematical models and science policy decisions. He testified several times before Congress on environmental protection, including the importance of passing the 1990 Clean Air Act. From 2003 to 2014, Jerry served as the editor-in-chief of the leading journal Environmental Science and Technology and was the founding editor-in-chief of ESE&T Letters in 2013 to 2014. From 2007 to 2009, he served as the chair of the Iowa Climate Change Advisory Council, appointed by Governor Culver. So there's also a whole list of awards that he's received around research and leadership in water sustainability. So I will pass it on to him. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for the Alliance for organizing these events. I go back a long time with your organization for the State Senator Hogue, and I worked together in Hancock plants a long time ago. And I wasn't born. We have a bonus today too. I just returned from a gig yesterday at Blank Park Zoo and our Hope for the Wild Conservation Series. And so, I'm sorry, I forgot there's two, right? How do I use this one? Oh, my clicker. Okay.
No, it's not a clicker, it's just a
Oh.
Let's put it right.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I was thinking I was covered with this other one. At Blank Park Zoo, their Hope for the Wild Conservation Series, so I threw in a little bit on biodiversity, which is also affected by climate change, as you know. So this is the big blue marble that we're trying to protect. As you know, there's no planet B. I think this is the one we have to become invested in. For this talk, I'll point out a few important things. One is biodiversity on land and water we'll talk about. One is the immensity of the oceans, and can we possibly be changing those in our lifetime? And we'll start right here on the thin veneer, which we call an atmosphere. It's only about 30 miles high. The gravity from the center of the Earth, as you know, the attraction keeps those gases hugging our skin. And that's a very, very small reservoir. And when you have 7.7 billion people now, and $80 trillion gross world product, we're so powerful and we're so big that we can actually change the composition of these reservoirs. And it starts with the atmosphere. It's a top-down global warming that we're experiencing and causing some of the other effects that we're going to talk about. Right now, you know, December and January, Australia is on fire. And a great loss of species. That's partly the biodiversity part. They think a billion animals or more have perished. 34 deaths, 46 million acres. From a standpoint of climate change, when arid areas are getting drier and wet areas like Iowa are getting wetter. And there's pretty good reason for that. In the case of the arid areas, when you only have a little bit of soil moisture and the air is warmer, it evaporates faster. So droughts start earlier and go longer. Wildfire seasons start earlier and go longer, and this was the most intense one they've ever had, both in area and intensity of the wildfires. Koalas are the poster child for many, many animals. The black cockatoo, the green carpenter bee, which only occurs here in New South Wales. We haven't seen a single one since the fires. But koalas are already vulnerable to extinction. The World Wildlife Fund thinks that they won't make it beyond 2050, that they will be extincted, and several hundred died just in New South Wales in the fires. This female, a pregnant female, is badly burned and crying. The Australian Koala Foundation thinks it's not just climate change, but most of these biodiversity losses, the number one reason is habitat destruction, but also in their case, cars running over them, dogs being introduced, invasive species, diseases, and bushfires from global warming, exacerbated by global warming. Now there was an important, this is the biodiversity part, there was an important report that we'll just mention, and that's from the Policy and Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services report. And it came out last year. It shows that intergovernmental body has determined that we're losing species faster than ever. Worse, it's accelerating. And we already knew that it was roughly 100 to 1,000 times the natural rate of species extinctions. That's always occurred, as you know. Species have always died out and new ones have always come on. But the rate of extinction is, 100 to 1,000 times. You know, we're Homo sapiens, right? Homo sapiens, how many species are in our genus, Homo?
One.
Just one. I can't think of another species where there's only one species in the genus, but that's us. We think we maybe coexisted with Homo erectus for a short time, but we're the species that is involved in all of these causes of biodiversity loss. Habitat destruction being number one, global warming, ocean acidity, we'll talk more about that, coral reef collapse, use of pesticides, even the bug zappers on our back porch, we now think are responsible for some of the extinction of species, and many of those are pollinators that we depend on for much of our agriculture to pollinate the crops. Without pollinators, we wouldn't have agriculture. Okay, we'd still have corn. You know, that's wind-blown pollen, but many crops require the pollinators. We don't know even how many species we have. The report says we're going to lose 1 million in our lifetime. 1 million species are going down. We don't know all their names. We don't know exactly how many we have. We've used big data, statistical data analytics to figure out the best estimate seems to be about 8.7 million species, but we only have Linnaean genus and species names for 1.4 million of those. So when you're losing 1 million out of 8 million, you should be concerned. We don't even know what they do for us. Anybody know who said this quote? God has an enormous, pardon me? Haldane, yes. God has an inordinate fondness for beetles. And the group that has the most species are beetles. And God, what a beautiful one shown right there. I'd love to find, but about 350,000 species of beetles are known. We think there's actually 1 million species of beetles, but we don't have names for them all, haven't discovered them all. That's out of 6 million insect species estimated, and the beetles are among the most threatened groups in that report. There's a real good summary of that report online for policymakers if you're interested in this subject. My favorite author on this subject is Ed Wilson, E.O. Wilson from Harvard, and the book that is relevant, his most recent one, is Half Earth, and that is where's the hope? What do we do about this? And the hope is that we can preserve or dedicate half of the Earth. That's what's necessary to stop this massive extinction that we're experiencing right now. And there's a couple of quotes here. I'll just read Ed's because it's so beautiful. When we debase the global environment and extinguish the variety of life, we are dismantling a support system that is too complex to understand, let alone replace in the foreseeable future. This IPBES report emphasizes ecosystem services. They think that they maybe can get us to improve our behavior if we tie it up in what are the animals and plants doing for us. And that's ecosystem services. And of course, we don't even, as Ed Wilson said, we don't even fully understand what they're all doing for us, but we're messing with the very basis of life. If you're in Australia, climate change visits you through wildfires. Ditto for California. Coastal desert. Dry areas are getting drier. Wildfires are getting much, much worse, like the awful Paradise, California fire. 81 people died, mostly in their cars, trying to get out of the blaze in Paradise, California. What an awful way to go, the campfire. Hurricane Dorian, if you're in the Caribbean, you know climate change through the increase in severity of storms. The storms are fueled by warmer oceans. We know for a fact that the oceans are quite a bit warmer just in the last 30 years. Believe it or not, that massive 70% of the Earth that we saw in the first slide, we're able to change the temperature of the ocean. We can see the signal going down very clearly, 2,000 meters. Warmer on top. Remember, it's first the wrapping of the blanket around the atmosphere. That gets warmer, then that heats the ocean. Then it goes down from there. Hurricane Dorian, what an awful event last year. Can you imagine Abaco Island? The storm paused for 40 hours. 185 mile per hour winds. Category 5. Can you imagine the terror of enduring 40 hours of that kind of storm? Never before had that happened. Lowest pressure measured as a result of a storm like that. Many people put their kids up on the roof thinking when the storm surge came, that would be destroy the homes. And the storm surge was a 20-foot wave that just washed across the island, swept the kids away in the storm. For Iowa, if you live in Iowa, climate change visits us, as you know, with more intense precipitation events and flooding. And so here in Cedar Rapids, we've had floods in 8, 11, 16, 18, 19. And I can show you that basically what's happened is our 100-year, 1 in a 100-year event storm is almost about a 25-year storm now. So much, much more frequent when you get that kind of intensity of precipitation events. When you have those kind of events in Iowa, our precious soil is lost too, especially if it comes in the springtime. We've had wet springs, and especially if it comes before the crop is canopied over. So you can have, this started as a gully, became sheet erosion. Farmer lost a good portion of his entire field. We've lost more than half of our topsoil since settlement here. Settlement in Iowa City area was started. I have a friend with a farm dated 1837, so that's about when we were settled with cheap land. University of Iowa is about, I think, 17 years older than University of Illinois. It's because people wanted that land first, and it was deeded after the Louisiana Purchase, and that's why we were settled so anxiously by people. If 2019 was an amazing year, I think it's lost on people that we're not just breaking records, we are shattering records. In 2019, for the period between September 2018 and through August 2019, averaged over the entire state of Iowa, we had 50 inches of precipitation. 4 feet of precipitation in 1 year. Our average is 34 inches. We are not just breaking the records, we are shattering them as a result of just 1 degree Celsius, that's 1.8 degree Fahrenheit, warmer climate. These are the effects that we're experiencing already. So I don't think we want to go much further. In 2019, as you know, we had record snowfall in the Missouri River Basin, followed by a bomb cyclone in March, delivering many inches of rain on top of the snow, and the Missouri River flooded. We paid over $1 billion to repair the levees after the 2011 storm there. Now we're faced with the question, Senator Hogue is very much involved with it. We're faced with the question, what do we do now? Do we spend another $1.5 billion to repair the levees to preserve 200,000 acres of land? The poor people in Hamburg were underwater for 6 months this year. 6 months. And my own hometown, Davenport, Iowa, I took lots of candidates through the flood damage. So did Senator Hogue, he was with us. You may know the story. We set a record flood stage by only 1/100 of an inch, but what was really record was the volume of water again, because the flood stage at Rock Island is where the gauge is, was over 80 days in flood stage, unprecedented. And on the 51st day, Davenport has decided they don't want a permanent flood wall like Dubuque. They say we don't want to cut ourselves off from the river. We want that. We have beautiful John O'Donnell Stadium where our minor league team plays. We're not going to cut ourselves off from the river. We're going to invest in HESCO barriers and put those up. I know Cedar Rapids is faced with these same decisions, and put those up, and they did it, but on the 51st day, the water undermined the HESCO barriers and flooded the downtown. Ditto for Burlington, Iowa. Basically the same story. When, in our lifetime, greenhouse gases have done nothing but increase. The statisticians call that monotonic increase. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, that's been true. When we invented the steam engine and first began to burn copious quantities of coal, our emissions, CO2 from burning the coal, later oil and natural gas, have just gone up and up. Not only do we need this to level off, we should have a big planetary celebration on the day it finally levels off. We need it to basically go away. 45, let's say 50% decline in emissions by 2030. That's in just 10 years. And net zero emissions by 2050. That's to stabilize the climate at a 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit increase. And we've already experienced 1.8 degrees of that. So we've already loaded, in other words, we've already loaded the system for more warming. I can tell you for sure it's going to get worse before it gets better. It is going to get better. There's still time, but there's not much time to realize this is truly an existential crisis. This is truly an emergency. And when you only have 10 years to act for a 50% decline in emissions, for a way of life, I tell my students it's been a good run. For over 200 years, we've powered our cars, we've made our clothes, we've built our homes, we've done manufacturing and business and industry, everything based off of fossil fuels. It's been a good run, but it's over. Not because that fossil fuels we're running out. We are not running out of fossil fuels. We have lots more. What we are running out of is a place to put the exhaust from burning the fossil fuels. And that's that thin veneer that we saw on the first slide. We're running out of space for those emissions. We're now at 413 parts per million. It's increasing now about 3 parts per million each and every year. If this was your blood gas profile, you'd just gone in to see the doctor, I think you would be worried. we should be worried.
Is that CO2?
That's CO2.
I can't read it.
I'm sorry, I will try to, I should know signing, but
That doesn't help.
no, that won't help. Duh. This slide might interest you. This is Homo sapiens right here. We may have overlapped with Homo erectus a little bit 200,000 years ago. This goes back through the last 8 glaciations, 800,000 years. This is direct measurements, 800,000 years of carbon dioxide direct measurements, because we have we can take ice cores a mile deep in Antarctica, pull them up, slice them, melt them down under a vacuum, suck off the gas bubbles that were laid down at the time of that ice, and measure the carbon dioxide concentration directly. So we know that this corresponds to the glacial cycles. Every time it's a high concentration of CO2, that's an interglacial period. That's an interglacial period about 100,000 years ago. Here's another interglacial period when the glaciers, the Des Moines lobe of the Wisconsinian glaciation left Iowa in about 14,000 years ago. That means we have much less ice on the planet. But here's where we are today. Unprecedented in 800,000 years. We're doing a brand new experiment. We think we understand these glacial cycles, and that is Jupiter and Saturn are enormous planets, and they have irregular orbits. They exert a gravitational effect on Earth's orbit, and thus we have irregular orbit. We have at least 3 kinds of eccentricities in our orbit. One that maybe is easiest to explain is the tilt of the Earth and how we present ourselves in the ecliptic with the sun. All the planets are lined up in a plane, as you know. And that, it's 23.5 degrees, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Even a 0.1 degree shift due to the gravitational pull, when most of the land is in the northern hemisphere, even a 0.1 degree shift, that causes a big change in our energy balance. More and more energy is absorbed by the land masses. The energy change causes also then less ice to be around, more grasses, more bacteria, more animals, more carbon dioxide. They track, but first comes the change in the energy balance, then comes the change in the CO2 under natural conditions. Now, we've done something totally unprecedented. We're leading with the carbon dioxide signal, which is, as you know, 413 parts per million. Never been anywhere near that in 800,000 years. And we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. The other shoe is the increase in temperature, which is lagging. So we've already loaded the system with more warning. It's going to get worse before it gets better. When you do that, the global average temperature increases. This is the change in the temperature off of a 1880 to 1920 baseline. So we take that as being sort of before the Industrial Revolution has really started to affect climate. So there's our average. And you can see we're more than a degree Celsius, more than 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer on the average. And the signal really started to emerge from the noise when I started giving these talks. I told a reporter yesterday, I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day. For 30 years, I've been given the same speech several times at this church right here. For 30 years, given the same speech over and over and over and over. When are we going to learn? So it just keeps going up when you change the energy balance by adding greenhouse gases to that thin veneer of an atmosphere, like putting a blanket over the atmosphere. The good news is there's good things happening. Renewable energy, wind and solar globally, is increasing 14% per year. It's a huge increase, 14% per year. But you can see that wind and solar, hydropower, and nuclear. These are the good low carbon fuels. We can talk about payload plant if we want to in question and answer. But they're dwarfed by the amount of, this is in exajoules, 10 to the 18th joules. They're dwarfed by coal, oil, and gas. This is the year-on-year increase in coal. Good news is it's going down now. This is the year-on-year increase in oil. It's going up. And this is the year-on-year increase in gas. They all have to go down. I tell my students, coal, oil, and natural gas, in that order, is going to be gone in their lifetime. You heard it here first. We'll talk more about it. Already, if you're a coal companies are going bankrupt right now. They can't borrow money. They can't sell their assets. We're seeing it already in the coal industry. Oil will be next. We've known since 1859 that when you add greenhouse gases, when you shine infrared radiation, like the back radiation that comes off of the Earth on a cloudless night and goes out into space, when you shine that kind of radiation on certain gases, like carbon dioxide, water vapor also, actually most any gas with more than 2 atoms per molecule, they begin to vibrate. When they vibrate, they've absorbed the energy from the back radiation. And that causes heat, kinetic energy, that causes heat. And that's the source of the warming that we're experiencing from top down, from the atmosphere down into the oceans. Oh gosh, what did I do? Sorry. I'm here to tell you that the science is well worked out. 97% of all the scientists agree that we're experiencing warming. Prior to that, maybe some said that the climate is so variable, they didn't believe that you could see the signal. But now, virtually everybody agrees. You can see the signal, it's statistically significant, and it's due to us. And that's because the evidence is truly massive. It comes from space, from satellites. Ever since 1979, we've had good climatological measurements in satellite. It comes from oceans. I'll show you that in a minute. It comes from ice cores. I mentioned that earlier. It comes from fossil record. It comes from tree rings. It comes from ground-based measurements. It comes from isotopic changes in carbon throughout the planet. It comes even from our infrared measurement of CO2. We can see it mixing, we can see the sources, and we can measure the sources of CO2. Mass balance on carbon. All these things add up to one conclusion. We are changing the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that is changing the climate in ways due to us. For me, the smoking gun was sort of 2005 when we joined an international experiment called Argo, and that was to put floats in the ocean, free floating buoys into the ocean. We've got about 4,000 of them now. You can go online, in fact, put in Argo, and you can see where they're floating right now in real time. These sondes, they regenerate themselves about every 7 to 10 days by coming up to the surface and solar powering. Then they go through a programmed dive. Most of them go down about 2,000 meters. Some go down 6,000 meters now, and measure very carefully the temperature and the salinity all the way through their program constantly. We have a pretty good idea of exactly how much warmer the oceans have gotten. I could have never imagined going to school at Iowa State in chemical engineering if you had told me in my working lifetime we'll change the entire ocean. The temperature of that thermal mass, that enormous thermal mass, the temperature, and yes, the chemistry too. We're coming to that. I would have said, you're crazy. There's no way we could possibly affect the oceans. I might have believed the atmosphere, but no way the oceans. So here's ocean acidity This is the CO2 signal going up, up, up in the atmosphere. This is the CO2 dissolved in the ocean. And it's a weak acid, like the CO2 in your Coca-Cola, the carbonic acid. And it's causing the pH to go down. That's a logarithmic measure, as you know. And it's roughly, again, in my working lifetime, a 30% increase in acidity, hydrogen ion acidity of the oceans. It's decimating the coral reefs, both the temperature and the increased acidity. We could stand to lose, at least in our kids' lifetime, basically all the coral reefs in the ocean. The Arctic is melting, the floating ice in the Arctic, and that doesn't change sea level like the ice cubes in your glass of water. When they melt, the level in the glass stays the same because they've already exerted their buoyant effect. So this doesn't affect sea level, but if you're a polar bear and you need to fish off of the ice, you're in trouble. This one does affect sea level. This is the surface melt off of Greenland. This is what it looks like in the summertime. This melt water can enter a shaft called a moula, and we worry about the lubrication of the water on the island land surface and the ice interface, because as you know, this glacier ice is falling into the ocean constantly, well, at glacial speeds, right? But we worry about, could we be speeding it up and causing it to fall off the island much faster? And if so, that would be double trouble. This meltwater is already about half a Lake Erie each year. We're adding about half a Lake Erie each year to the ocean, and it's responsible now for about Antarctic and Greenland, and all the ice melt is responsible for about half of sea level rise. The other half of the sea level rise is due to the warming ocean because water expands as it becomes warmer. So it's about a 50-50 proposition, and the ice melt is starting to predominate now. Remember that property you were going to buy in Miami? I don't know about that. Even at conservative estimates of a 1 meter change in sea level by 2100, even with conservative estimates, this red area of Miami and Dade County, all of Miami and a good portion of Dade County will be underwater. We just invested $8 billion in trying to flush out the Everglades in Florida, and about half the Everglades will be part of the ocean. And if you want to talk about the whole world, and if you want to estimate what if Greenland collapses, Greenland has about 7 meters of ice. If it all fell into the ocean, it would raise the sea level about 7 meters. If that happened, you can look at the blue areas around the world and see who is inundated, and all the climate refugees that would be created. Can you imagine in places like Bangladesh, China, the Bohai Sea area, a big portion of China, Beijing, Tianjin, all underwater.
East coast of the United States.
Yeah, the whole East Coast.
A lot of
Yes.
population.
This is the Iowa part. I'm going to go through these fast because actually this was for Blank Park Zoo, so I used all Des Moines data. But I wanted to show them that their intense storms where they have flooding over 1.25 inches have been increasing. This is data from Gene Tackley at Iowa State University, who I work closely with. That the minimum temperature we experience in the wintertime, we have warmer winters. We don't have really cold days anymore, not very much. But surprisingly, we don't have very many hot days in the summer either. We think it's due to moist air is more difficult to heat to a high temperature. And our air is much moister. We are way more humid than we even were in 1970. The humidity, we can measure it from satellite. Infrared satellite can see the increasing humidity, especially at night, especially in the summertime. So our summertime temperatures aren't cooling off anymore. The minimum summertime, nighttime temperatures are much higher than they used to be because the dew point, here's the dew point for, it's a west to east in Iowa gradient. The effect is much greater in eastern Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Davenport, Dubuque. This is since 1970. Their average dew, we use dew point because what you're really interested in is water volume content. That's reflected most by dew point. Relative humidity is not a good measure. But the dew point has gone from an average in 1970 of about, 57 to 2010, an average of about 63. That's a big, big change in average dew point over just a few decades. So we're debating, do we have a climate emergency? I think so. Because if it's true that to stop the warming at 1.5, or let's even, I don't think we can do it, to tell you the truth. I think we're going to about 2.7 or 3 degrees Celsius. If we go to 3, that's 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer over the entire planet, averaged over all seasons. We're already at 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. So if you have to change to stabilize the atmosphere and thus stabilize the climate, if you have to have a 50% reduction in 10 years, and you're trying to build more wind turbines, solar is what we're really missing in Iowa. We're missing that piece. More energy efficiency, a better grid to transport our new intermittent electricity that we're producing, electric vehicles and battery technology, and regenerative agriculture to suck the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it into our soils, which we've lost more than half of all our soils since settlement days, and to try to look for new crops, perennials instead of annual crops. All these things take time. And we have to have 50% decline in 10 years. So that's why I think, yeah, I think we are in a climate emergency. This is pretty sobering too. The red ball here is how much proven reserves of oil, coal oil, and natural gas we have. Owned by there's a few national oil companies still, but mostly owned by private companies. And they already own it. The shareholders own that red ball. This is how much we can burn if we want to keep the temperature from doubling from 1 degree Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius, with all the ramifications associated with that. So we can't burn what we've already discovered. The economists call that stranded assets. We're looking at stranded assets big time. $2 trillion of oil invested already, owned by the companies, and they think they're going to burn it. And meanwhile, they're exploring in the Arctic for more oil. We can't go there. We got to keep it in the ground. And so the day of reckoning is coming. It's happened for coal already. Oil will be next. Natural gas after that. All the fracking pipelines that we're building, which last 50 to 75 years, forget it. What kind of an investment is that? We can't use it. We can't use it. We shouldn't be investing in that infrastructure. So here's what we're going to do. Do we have time? Yeah, we got time. But we're pushing the envelope now. We really have to get moving. We need a clear price signal into the marketplace that fossil fuels have to pay their externalities. They have to pay for all the health effects, emphysema and asthma, for all the decline in visibility, for all the climate change and the damages associated with repairing the levees in Hamburg, Iowa. All of those are externalities that are not being paid in the price of that fuel, and they have to be paid. We need a clear signal into the marketplace to make those things pay their fair share of their damages, And thus, solar, wind, efficiency, electric car, everything else will get cheaper by economy of scale. The net effect will be, I say, beneficial. We're doing what's called creative destruction. We're wiping out the old system, which we can no longer abide by, and replacing it with something brand new and better. Can you imagine clean air in California and Houston and Phoenix? Can you imagine the increase in lost time days at work, in health and well-being of people in this new system? It's a better new system, and it's going to create the jobs, wealth, and prosperity for our kids. Sometimes they say to me now, okay, boomer, we've had it pretty good. You know, if you think about it, Social Security is here for us. I went to school at Iowa State University. I worked at Iowa Illinois Gas and Electric in Davenport in the summers. I made enough money to pay for my room, board, and tuition in college. I came in with no debt. The students today have over almost $2 trillion in debt, more than all credit card debt. And that's how they start out in life. Can you imagine? Okay, boomer. Every house I invested in, I knew was just going to go up, up, and up. Every investment I made in my life. Yes, not only white privilege, but boomer privilege too. We lived in a gilded golden age. And they don't. And we're handing them on top of it, not only a Social Security system that won't work, not only a national debt that they have to pay off, but we're handing them a messed up planet with the promise of millions and millions of climate refugees. Who's going to take those people? Where are they going to go? So we have to reduce emissions now. The next 10 years are crucial. I'm hoping that young people get angry. We need them to be angry. We need them to be striking school because of what is happening right now to them. We have to adapt like Cedar Rapids has good government. You're doing good things. We have to continue to do that. We have to harden our infrastructure. If you build in the floodplain, it's got to be floodable. No porous materials on the first floor. No electric in the basement. Everything up higher. If you flood, you just got to hose it down and start over again. Raise the bridges, strengthen the highways. All of that has to be done because it's going to get worse before it gets better. We have to adapt, and of course, we have to mitigate. Right now, we don't have any leadership in our nation, but the cities, the NGOs, the businesses, they are acting, and that's where the action is. And so not only can we do individual things, and we should be reducing our carbon footprint, but we can do things cooperatively through these type of organizations. My students say they think I've got a silver bullet. I don't know anything. I'm just an egghead professor. But they say, well, you know, what should we do? And I tell them one thing. You know what it is? Vote.
Yes.
Young people don't vote. We do need some leadership from the top down. We do need some. And so, yeah, that's what I tell them. So bully for Greta. We had Greta in Iowa City. Bully for what she's done. Can you imagine a person? She's on the spectrum. She's autistic, and she has 4 million people in the streets. This is, I think, what we need to really begin to change things. You've been very kind. I went too long.
That's all right.
I'm sorry, but if we have time for questions, I'm here.
Yep, we have about 15 minutes for questions. Can we hear? Okay, good. Thank you so much.
You know, thank you. The solution to reducing global warming is to eliminate or reduce the carbon emissions, but that costs big business a lot of money. And they're not going to be willing to do that willingly. Is there any tax incentives that we could allow for them?
You know, the big proposal, as you know, is fee and dividend, that we tax it at the wellhead and tax it at the point of entry, and that'll be passed through the economy. But yes, that will hurt coal, oil, and natural gas companies. But other companies who make wind, solar, We have 75,000 coal miners left. We have 600,000 wind workers in the nation already. That's going to be we don't have blacksmiths anymore today, right? We used to do our fields with horses. We had oats in Iowa. Why? Because that was our oil. That was the fuel for the horses to plow. Things change, and they're going to have to change. And new industries will spring up to support this new economy, and old industries will die of necessity.
What about population growth? You didn't mention that at all.
So difficult to change the population that to be honest, I don't see it happening. We think the demographers tell us we think it's going to level off at 9 or 10 billion in the middle of this century. That's way too many. That's a big part of the biodiversity problem that we talked about at the outset. So yes, you're right. You've identified an important problem, but I didn't mention it because I don't see a solution there. He was off by about 50 years or something like that. Yes.
Is photovoltaic ever going to be helpful at one time?
Oh, yeah.
But isn't it so too expensive?
No, it's come down so much, and it will keep coming down, especially if we do a fee and dividend. What about solar? Solar PV. Well, both kinds of solar. Concentrated solar in the desert, that still makes sense. There have to be environmental impact assessments, and can you imagine we're doing away with NEPA, the 1970 National Environmental Policy Act under the Trump administration? So that's a whole nother story. But solar PV in Iowa makes infinite sense because so often when the wind isn't blowing, the sun is shining. If we have a smart grid, we can dispatch that power around the Midwest, and we need to go there. Yes.
Right here.
This goes back to Fred's question on carbon fee. This idea of taxing carbon to recover the real costs is not new.
No.
It seemed to make sense to me when I was in graduate school and first became
Do you
acquainted
remember
with you.
PIGO? PIGO was the Pigovian taxes.
Okay.
That's the sin tax.
But they're going to fall disproportionately on the people who are already most hurt by environmental degradation, which is poor people. Now, if you say carbon tax or carbon fee and dividend, how do we make sure that that dividend gets back to the people who don't have a bank, who don't have a credit card, who are not part of the financial system?
I worry about that too.
Yeah.
As a person who's already had my identity and income tax filed twice, I lost it twice, I worry about the government distributing biweekly checks to the entire population of the. I do worry about that. I worry about hedge funds getting involved, all kinds of things. But I think it's the best proposal we have. We have to try to make it work. And the dividend is key because the people you mentioned who are living in poverty, working 2 jobs, they will benefit the most because their income check should be greater than any expense increase due to the rise in fossil fuel costs.
Back here.
Yes.
Hi, I have a suggestion maybe that we could maybe do today.
Yes, we need it.
At no cost, and all of us could do it from now on. Every time you're tempted to say, what a beautiful warm day for February, say, what a warm day for February, we must do something about climate change.
That would help to spread the word. Here's one here. Thanks, Bridget.
We spent about 5 years down in the Southwest, and there are all these, the old Pueblos, the extinct civilizations, and it's not just there, in the Mayans and a whole lot of other places around the world. And a lot of the evidence is that these went extinct because they did not pay attention to what they were doing to the environment. Now, these are just individual in civilizations. We're talking about this on the global scale. And I don't see evidence that our human nature will recognize that we're all in this together. And it's not just us Americans, not just us Iowans, it's everyone in the world who's going to have to get in this. And I just don't know how this is going to be done.
Yeah. Some of us are active in the United Nations Association and trying to support. That's maybe, thank God for the United Nations. It's the only game in town. They're at least talking about these problems. We have the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. You should know that we actually have halved poverty since 2000. People are living on more than $2 a day, 30% more than were just in year 2000. We have begun to educate girls and young women, and we know that good things happen when that happens. So a lot of the things that the United Nations is pushing and tracking through the Sustainable Development Goals are making a better world despite the increased population.
But educating girls and women helps cut the population.
That's true. That's true. So I would say I'm hopeful. I told you I feel like Groundhog Day. I've given the same talk for 30 years, but I have to get up and come to First Presbyterian Church tomorrow if I have to and give the same talk, because what's the alternative? We have to realize this is an existential crisis. Yes.
Well, thank you for being here again and again and again. This is more of a comment. If you're looking for an organization to plug into, I go to the Sunrise meetings, which are held the first Sunday of every month at New Pioneer Co-op at 6 o'clock. And you can go there and get your dinner and support the co-op. And the great thing about this organization is that it's young people. And it's the only one I've ever been to where I've seen more young people than people like me. So that gives me hope. And they're working on the passage of the Green New Deal.
Thank you, Charles.
I have two local things like my friend Myrna. One is I forgot in my car 2 sets of bamboo silverware that I meant to bring in here, and I have them in a plastic little Ziploc bag, which we're really trying hard not to use except over and over and over again. And so if everybody in this room brought their bamboo silverware in, that would be great. And then also with our trips, we're now trying to remember to buy carbon offsets. And I'm wondering if you have an opinion about that.
My students and I are trying to get the University of Iowa doesn't have a policy. We can't use our, when we travel for the university, and I'm guilty as charged, we cannot use the grant money to pay for the carbon offsets, which are substantial. And but we're trying to change that policy and have the university be a certifier and actually operate the planting of trees and prairie grasses here in Iowa. Yes, so we're trying, and right on. You're exactly right. Carbon offsets vary a lot in price and what they're doing. You do kind of have to check into the various companies. Yes.
Yes, Professor. It occurs to me that Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, any municipality could actually put solar panels on any house that can accommodate them and profit from them, and do so by issuing revenue bonds. And the solar panels and their installation would be essentially free to the homeowner because their costs could be repaid through the generation of energy that is not used by the homeowner.
I like it. I like a good suggestion.
In the 1970s, I took a class on this, and unfortunately, our generation never continued. It was many of the things that you're talking about, plus more. But at that time, they said that coal was needed in order for industry to operate, that was the reason you couldn't just eliminate the coal. So would you speak to that? I know that we have probably fewer manufacturing like we did back then, but have we come up with converters and things, or how's that been affected?
The coal is pretty easy to get away from now. It's not used industrially. The oil is more difficult. It's still a feedstock. About 20% of our petroleum usage is still going into industry, largely to make plastics, but no, that's facetious. Largely to make chemicals for everything we do in consumer society. So that part would be difficult to stop, but the 80% that's used for transportation fuel will be easy to stop because we're going to electrify everything. But when you electrify everything, even take away the natural gas in your home, that'll be electric heating too. It has to be generated the proper way. Right now we're still getting almost 50% of our electricity from coal in Iowa. That has to stop first, then we can completely electrify everything. I think that's where it's going, electric vehicles.
I'm a big supporter of nuclear power, and because the energy is continuous, independent of the weather or night and day.
Capacity, yes.
And I'm hearing more and more of a adverse reaction to wind generators around people's homes.
I agree.
And I was disappointed that the Pueblo plant is closing. And
yeah, when we recertified it, I thought it had another 25 years, but now they're giving up.
Can you tell me what the real reason is and whether this is a phasing out of nuclear power around the country or what?
Globally, nuclear power is still growing slowly. You may have seen it on it was hard to see, but that year-on-year growth in nuclear, it's still growing. Some countries are still investing. Here in the United States, it's very, very flat. We have 2 new units about to come online in South Carolina. But in general, people believe it's got an adverse public reaction, hard to cite, at least 10 years from a decision to power out. Who's going to invest in something over $1 billion that won't deliver any revenue for 10 years? It's an economic problem. That's what they have, is an economic. And we never came to grips with the waste if you're going to use fission. I think we could have fixed that, but we didn't. That's a long political story. But the main reason is economic. Why Pueblo isn't renewed and why we're not building new ones. Even our own Mid-America, which has pledged to go 100% wind power, bless their heart, they, wanted us to invest in a new modular nuclear power plant in Muscatine, but they wanted the revenue to come from the ratepayers in advance of, they needed to make up that $1 billion investment in advance. That's not fair that the ratepayer, it's another case of privatizing the profits and publicizing all the risks and the costs. That's what we have today. It's not fair. It's not equitable.
Last question right here.
Hi, I'm going to put in a plug for another organization, kind of like Charles did. There's the Citizens Climate Lobby that meets tomorrow morning at the Marion Public Library, 11 a.m. And it's not a lot of young people, it's a lot of old people. Sorry. But our main focus is to get carbon fee and dividend passed at the national level. So that's a 40% decrease in emissions in 12 years. So not quite the 10 years we need, but we still keep trying. So see you tomorrow at 11 a.m., Marion Public Library.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you so much, Professor Schnoor. So join me in thank you. That's awesome. Oh my gosh, you guys. Thank you. Sorry.